Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Can people make positive changes in their lives that really last? Dr. Mark Baker has been trying to answer this question for the past 25 years as a clinical psychologist. To discover the answer, he went on a quest to find people who have changed their lives in the most dramatic ways, ending up in the largest maximum security prison in the United States, located in Angola, Louisiana. Once the most brutal prison in the United States, Angola was transformed into one of the most effective sites for rehabilitation in the country. He uses stories from inside Angola, along with his decades of experience as a clinical psychologist, to share with readers the amazing human potential for change and personal growth. Drawing on themes of forgiveness, community, justice, hope, and spirituality, he shows all of us how to change our lives for the better, no matter who we are or what we've done. Dr. Mark Baker received his PhD in clinical psychology and a master's degree in theology, as well as a certificate in psychodynamic psychotherapy. He serves as the executive director of the LaVie Counseling Centers in Pasadena and Santa Monica, California. He's the author of several books, including Jesus, the Greatest Therapist Who Ever Lived, which has more than 2 million copies in print, and he's the author of You Can Change and Overcoming Shame. Let go of others' expectation and embrace God's acceptance. Dr. Baker joins us the second Friday of every month at the 12 o'clock p.m. hour. You can find more about him at drmarkbaker.com. I want to welcome in my dear friend, Dr. Mark Baker, to this hour of Overcoming Shame.
Eric, good to see you. It's always good.
Always.
I look forward to our conversations.
Always look forward to it. It is personal therapy for me. So I feel that I get the great discount rate, and the audience gets to sit in on something that would normally be patient therapist privileged, but you and I have found a way to incorporate transparency in both of our backgrounds and struggles that we've had that put you on a path of professional discovery and ultimately turned my life around to spiritual discovery that was the pathway to healing for me of spiritual maladies, behavior patterns, relationship failures, all steeped in the same connection to shame, without even understanding what shame even was, or why the circumstances under which even my birth put me on a pathway of disconnection, of really making poor decisions, and yet in God's grace being extremely successful. But in looking at the path and the trail of bodies that lay behind me, when I made that inventory 25 years ago after coming to the Lord, I realized that there was a lot of fallout from the behaviors that I had adopted in the first 45 years of my life. So
God loved you too much to leave you alone. He came after you.
He did, and it was. There was a real shaking. There was a lot of testing. There were new tests to see if I had learned the lessons. And I think that was the most shocking part for me, was that after I accepted the Lord, I thought this was the key that unlocked the door to all kinds of wonderful blessings and abundance and new relationships and stability, a new concept of love and grace, mercy and forgiveness. And yet I was tested with 2 life-changing betrayals. One within 6 months of saying yes to the Lord that cost me millions of dollars. Took everything that I had. And then years later, one that would restart my life all over again, back to ground zero at the age of 62. And it was a testing. And I see it as not only a testing, but not so much as saying that I passed the test, but that I went for the help that I needed as to how to respond, and I did what I was told. And God honored that and brought this incredible increase to us so that we could share these stories with others and that they too can understand how God operates in making sure that, just like in the classroom, you're taught information and then you're tested to see whether or not you retain it, and then you learn to apply it. I don't understand where algebra comes into play because I've never used it after I learned it, but nevertheless, that's the system under which we work. Many lessons we learn that we may not have to apply. Today we're going to talk about something that I'll have to be very honest with you. I was married to someone who was pretty classical in this particular personality disorder, if you will. But I didn't know anything about it until the marriage ended, and my daughter said to me, "Well, didn't you know?" And I said, "I don't know what that is." And it was narcissism. And I had no framework. And so she said, "Well, Dad, you need to get a grip. You're 62 years old. You've never heard of this?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of it." "Well, this is what it looks like." And she rattled off, and here she was now. This is 7 years ago, so she was 24 years old. And she pinpointed. She said, "Don't you remember this? And don't you remember that? And don't you remember this?" And so then I would look it up, and it would say, "Well, yeah, that's what this." And I was shocked. I had no idea.
Right.
And I was drowning, and I didn't know why I was drowning.
Right. Couldn't make it work. Now, and I think especially in the church, we're really at sea in dealing with certain kinds of personality problems, because the Bible doesn't spell that out. There's no narcissistic personality disorder in the Bible. And so there are certain actual pathological ways of being that can look very spiritual. It can look okay, that looks good. This whole cluster of narcissism often results in personality types that are very successful and attractive and winning in their personality. And people get in behind them and want to follow them and be around them and like them and marry them and date them. So there's something very attractive about it, and yet it isn't what it appears to be, not on the inside. And in the church, we're often fooled by psychological problems because we look at the behavior and say, well, okay, it's not really sin, but it's really wrong. I deal with this a lot because I run a Christian counseling center, and people come in confused and hurt and damaged by leaders in the church who are suffering from clusters of personality problems, and they don't know what to say about it or what to do about it. How do I respond to this person who's been so hurtful to me? And I can't go to the Bible and point out exactly what's wrong, but I know something is very wrong. So I think it's good for us to talk about this today, talk about narcissism and how we understand it as from a psychological perspective, from a biblical perspective, and how actually the science of psychology has changed just in the last 50 years in our understanding of these maladies and these problems. Psychology has evolved. In the middle of the last century, Margaret Mahler was the leading child development researcher, and everyone thought Margaret Mahler had it right. And her idea was we need to grow up and separate and individuate. So the goal of health is to be an individual person who individuates from family. And then everybody thought, okay, that's right. You need to be your own person. Uh, and Gestalt psychology came into being, and a lot of psychologies followed in behind that, where it just emphasized the individual as a separate, autonomous being is the epitome of psychological health. And lots of stuff came out of that. Christopher Lasch called it the culture of narcissism. It was the me generation, looking out for number one. So for decades, psychological research really was the foundation of people believing that you really need to look out for yourself. Looking out for number one is most important. And it created a belief, an extreme belief in individualism that permeated, it still today permeates a number of people's psychology. And we call it narcissism today, looking out for number one. Well, researchers have now changed. They've actually gone back and looked at Mahler's research and found methodological errors. The research that she was doing was very biased by her belief in the time that the ethos, the culture itself, helped inform the questions she would ask and the conclusions she would draw. And they went back and looked at her research, and now people like Daniel Stern and other infant researchers, Beatrice Beebe and others, are looking at her research going, well, that's not accurate. Actually, health isn't growing up and being an autonomous individual. That separation and individuation is not what we want. We want to grow our children up and have them be responsible people who can relate to others, who can be empathic and connected and have emotional intelligence. And now we talk about social intelligence. Even Daniel Goleman, who came up with the concept of emotional intelligence is separate from IQ. You know, like you have to read people and you can have emotional intelligence like intellectual intelligence. Now he's talking about social intelligence. So we're saying, what? You mean really what's healthy is our ability to relate well? Actually, yes. What psychology is saying now is health is your ability to understand people, empathically grasp them, and relate effectively to them. It has nothing to do with individuation and autonomy and being a separate person. So I must apologize for all of psychology. We got it wrong, but we caught it. We caught our error and corrected it. And so now when you take an infant research course, you're going to look at things like the importance of mirroring, the importance of attunement, mirror neurons. We now know that you and I are connecting to each other automatically, that your neurons are actually reading my neurons and I'm reading your neurons, and we're responding to each other in a profoundly relational way that is really critically important for us to understand as human beings in the world today. That you are not an autonomous, separate individual, that you and I are created to relate first to God and then to others. And now we look at the teachings of Jesus and he says, you know, when you do this to the least of those, you're doing it to me. It all starts to make sense now. He was always talking about the importance of relationships. As I and the Father are one, you know, he kept making these relational statements. You know, that's not very narcissistic. If you're saying, okay, everything that comes from me comes from the Father, wait a minute, that's not looking out for number one. There's a profoundly relational truth about human beings that if you don't acknowledge that, you're going to have severe problems, not just in your relationships, but in your personal life. That when I look at Scripture now, and all the things that Jesus said about relationship with God, relationship with each other, relationship with Him, the vine, and it goes on and on and on, it makes perfect psychological sense now. That the notion of individuality, we now say in psychology, is a myth. That we have created the myth of individuality, meaning that I think I can function as an autonomous person. And decades ago, there was a whole psychological movement that encouraged people to say, if someone gets mad at you, you can say, well, I can't make you angry. That's your problem. You know, if you're angry, that's your issue. I have no responsibility for your feelings. Well, the truth is, I can make you angry pretty easily. We are so connected. I can offend you. I can insult you. Yes, I am my brother's keeper. That psychology of individuality we now see as a myth, and it's a defense against our profound vulnerability. In order for me to be the healthiest version of me, I need you. I need to interact with you, relate to you. I need community with you. For me to be actually who I was created to be, I need God. That fundamentally I'm a dependent creature, and in America today, dependency is a dirty word. We don't even want to say that word. We want to believe that I can be my own person and I'm completely independent. In psychology, we would call it interdependence, where I look at my responsibility and my relationship with you. But there's no me without you in a healthy way. There's no me without God for me to achieve my healthiest version of myself. So psychology has shifted now in our thinking. And that whole culture of narcissism and the belief in radical individuality that was supported by psychological research 50, 60, 70 years ago is no longer supported by psychological research today. We're now questioning at actual research itself. We're looking at the data and questioning it, because what we're seeing in the data now is infants have a profound ability to relate to their mothers from birth. And we used to think that didn't happen until 18 months or 2 years. We used to believe, no, there's just an amorphous sort of being there, and they develop individuality and the ability to relate as a healthy individual as they grow. And now we see, no, there's a relatedness that starts from birth. We watch infants, and we can, an 8-day-old infant will turn towards its mother's milk as opposed to another mother's milk. It can discriminate. It's seeking out the familiar. Oh, I know that smell. I'm going to seek it out. There's a looking for and a yearning for relationship with something outside ourselves. It starts very, 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 very early. What we would say about ourselves today is we're fundamentally relational beings.
You know, it's interesting. Last night, after you had emailed me, I pulled down some articles, and one was from Psychology Today. And it said that in the first 2 years, this bond is formed, and if that bond is not formed, then there is, I guess, a propensity. It's not a foregone conclusion, but there is a propensity for those people that did not bond. Now, when I was born, my mother had scarlet fever when I was delivered. So my eardrums ruptured as I passed through the birth canal. They immediately put her in isolation, put me in isolation. 1952, isolation was not a NICU unit with lots of hands and people. You're in some dark room in a box. You're isolated. I didn't meet my mother for 5 days. There was no bond. And that led without a bond, because I was obviously couldn't nurse, so had to be bottle fed. At that time, it was not. I don't think cow's milk was administered. It was formula. As I grew, the only attention that I was able to garner was through negative behavior. That was the only way I could ever get my father to pay any attention to me, was through discipline. I'd have to act out, or there was no engagement. And it seems so counterintuitive. Why would you want to have a relationship with the person you know that your encounter with them is going to wind up in a beating? But that was the only contact.
Right.
And that then drove the defiance, and ultimately it was so defiant and so volatile that I shipped off to boarding school at 14 and a half and have not been back home for 55 years to live under the roof with my parents. But yet I have this every Sunday at 11 o'clock for 55 years. I call my mother. It's the same call. Lasts about 3.5 minutes. It's been the same call for 55 years. But my father called his mother at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. So that became a pattern that And that was the day at boarding school where you could use the phone, and it just became a pattern. But as I looked at that article, I said, well, that makes sense. That
Sure.
if there's no bond, then and there's no connection, then the disconnect. You're not like other kids in a nuclear family, and your family doesn't operate like a nuclear family. So I really had two sisters that were both only children. It was kind of the structure of our family.
Right.
That every child was an only child.
Right.
And so we disbanded, even though, they're alive. There's just not a family unit because of the way that we interacted at that time. There's no relationship with cousins and aunts and uncles. There's no nuclear family whatsoever. So looking at my own life and the 45 years leading up to accepting the Lord, and then the difficult years of transition and transformation
Right.
into trying to conform and transform into the image of Messiah, those struggles would come out.
Right.
And
Sure.
and
Right.
to see it linked to shame, I guess you can develop. Is there such a thing as perceived shame versus real shame, or is all shame perceived, or is all shame real?
It's all real and perceived. Yes, it's both. The perception is a greater part of the problem for some than others, but it's always amalgamation of both. And I think what you're saying is important for all of us right now, because all of us, that the narcissistic behavior that got you in trouble was rooted in trauma, was rooted in injury to you, that those scars are still there. And even after becoming Christian, those scars are still there, and they can be evoked, and you can still struggle with that. And that's true for all of us. We would like to, and here's the latest thinking on narcissism. We would have liked to believe in the past that it's a discrete diagnosis, that person over there has a narcissistic personality disorder. I don't have that. They have that over there. Now we're thinking, okay, well, that's not right. We all struggle with the narcissistic personality disorder characteristics. It's just a matter of degree. And the last DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the Bible for psychologists, it's where we list all the pathologies, all the problems that we're trying to help people with. They were going to take narcissistic personality disorder out. They were going to say, you know what? I don't think it's a label you can put on certain people and not others, because really it has a context. In certain contexts, you're going to act very narcissistic, and in other contexts, you're not, and it's true for all of us. So they didn't take it out, but they modified it, and I think probably in the future they are going to take it out, because personality disorders are really just what trauma looks like in some people. You're traumatized, it's going to come out that way. This person's traumatized, it's going to come out this way. And for certain people, when they're traumatized, it looks like what we call a narcissistic personality disorder. But in my thinking, and really in our work with people, we don't even use that term anymore. We don't use narcissistic personality disorder. We call it narcissistic states of mind. We say it that way because if you have the right context, you're going to act differently. You're not going to be so narcissistic. We've just got to work together to create the right context for you and get to the healing of what's causing you to act that way. And it's really humbling to realize it's true for all of us. Now, there are certain people who are manifest these characteristics in an extreme degree, right? So it's on a continuum. We got some people who are way out there, and when you open up the DSM and you see narcissistic personality disorder, they hit on every single one of them. Right. So, and those people are really difficult to deal with because they are charismatic and often attractive, they're intelligent. People follow them, as we were talking about earlier. And often with those people who are on the extreme, if you were to say to them, I think you've got a narcissistic personality disorder, with many of them, they'd say, so what? their response would be, well, yeah, my narcissism is just kind of like it's like a characteristic. It's like extroversion. So I'm extroverted. So what? They would say, so I'm narcissistic. So what? And the bottom line is they don't want to change. And that's why they stay out on that extreme. Is because you try to bring it up to them, your behavior is problematic. They would say, I don't see it. I'm successful. People like me. I'm the president of this organization. I was elected to this office. No. And yeah, all right, so I'm a bit narcissistic. So what is the problem then? The problem is when people don't value other people. The real issue isn't narcissism. It's lack of empathy. The issue is you've got all these characteristics. You're charismatic. You have leadership traits. You're intelligent, attractive, all that stuff. But here's the thing. You don't really value people. Your relationships with other people are not because you love people. Your relationships with other people are because you need them to give you attention to cover your shame. And this is what we've discovered, is that the core of narcissism for all of us, but especially for the people who are in the extreme, is that they have profound unhealed shame that they are managing by getting the attention of other people. And here's the terrible irony of people in the extreme, is that they need other people to give them attention, but they don't value those people that they need the attention from. They just want the attention. They want the attention to quiet the shame. They don't even really need people. They just need the adoration, the admiration, the attention to quiet the shame. And because there is no real relationship there, there's no empathy, there's no intimacy, there's no mutuality there, they have to have it all the time. It's more and more and more. And people are replaceable. You know, if you're not giving me what I need, you're gone. There's someone in line behind you who will give me what I need. They don't value the person, they value the attention, the adoration, the admiration to quiet the shame. It serves what we call an antidotal function to quiet the shame. So you see how confusing this can be in the church, because here you've got a leader who's charismatic and teaches classes, and everybody loves this person, what they have to say, because they're so intelligent and so insightful. And it appears that I matter to them because when I ask them a question and I tell them how great they are, I mean, they focus in on me, and I feel like I'm important. It looks that way, right? But as soon as I disappoint that person because they are easily injured, I don't matter anymore. I'm out. I as a person have no personal value to that person because they lack empathy. So the issue here then is what we were saying earlier. They're violating what's most profoundly true about us, and that is our relational nature. These are not relationships. The extreme form of narcissism is not a relationship with other people. It's the using of other people to quiet my own shame. It looks like a relationship, but when it's ever tested, we find that it is not. There's no mutuality, there's no intimacy, there's no caring for the other person as a person. It's only caring what the other person can do in terms of their function for me. And then often sin creeps in. Then you'll find deceitfulness, manipulativeness, lying, the kind of behavior that is obviously sinful behavior creeps in. But in the beginning, it's hard to see it. You know, on the surface, it's hard to see it. So we get fooled in our relationships with people who have this extreme. And I want to say again that what's really important here is that all of us humbly approach this subject, because to some degree it's true for all of us. To some degree, my shame that I have, and we all have it, so to some degree we didn't get what we needed from our mothers. It's maybe not as extreme as being physically separated from our mothers at birth, but all of us to some degree were failed by what our parents, both parents, by what we needed for them and what we got from them. That results in shame. And so all of us to some degree have these narcissistic characteristics, narcissistic defenses, narcissistic behaviors that really make it about me and me needing to quiet my shame and using other people to quiet my shame. And that's where Jesus has a lot to say about the denial of self. He was constantly saying, hey, stop doing that. You know, stop just making it about you. There's a false self way of being that does not create intimacy and connection. And Jesus was constantly saying, that's a self you need to deny. Catch yourself doing it. All of you, catch yourself doing that. He was basically saying, catch yourself using those narcissistic traits. Catch yourself in your narcissism and stop doing that. Catch yourself doing that. Ask God to heal that, and be vulnerable in your relationships with other people. Put them first. Have empathy. Care about them, even the least. And what we have found, and here's the sad truth, it's good to know this, is that when we teach children empathy skills, and these are skills you can teach, we teach them how to read the face of the other child and care for what they feel. What does Johnny's face look like to you right now? What do you think Johnny's feeling? And they learn to read the facial cues of other people. So we teach them empathy. And after we teach them empathy, we give them a battery of tests. And you know what we find? Their self-esteem goes up. Their good feelings about themselves goes up. So empathy is the very thing I need for me to feel truly better about myself. And this is the opposite of what the individuality school was teaching. You know, you need to look in the mirror and tell yourself how great you are and look out for number one, and then you're going to feel better about yourself. All that does is cover over your shame. How we heal the shame is by acting in concert with our very nature, which is to love the other. And in loving the other, I feel more lovable. It's everything I read in the New Testament is psychologically brilliant. It just took psychology about 100 years to get there in our research to figure out, it's in loving the other that I feel loved and lovable. That's how that works. Yeah, that is how that works. We're getting it right now. We're starting to get it right now.
We've been talking with Dr. Mark Baker, as we do on the second Friday of every month at the 12 o'clock Central Time hour, and talking about overcoming shame, let go of others' expectations, embrace God's acceptance. You can find more about him at drmarkbaker.com. We're talking today about shame and narcissism, and a character trait that many of us have that manifests itself in various ways. You can't ever be wrong. It's always the other person's fault. There's extreme exaggeration, there is distortion, there is turning everything around, where you are constantly moving the responsibility to the injured party and showing them how they caused this action, and why are you taking that on me? You did this. You're responsible. And how many people are walking around who have been hurt by that behavior, but also come to grips with the fact that we all have certain of these tendencies, and if we can recognize them and then apply biblical truth and biblical values and biblical behaviors in the model of Jesus, then we can navigate our way out, not by intentionally charting a path, but by performing loving acts of kindness, service to others, by letting kindness flow from our mouths, letting no unwholesome talk come from our mouths, being slow to anger, showing deference to another person, examining that plank in our own eye first before we talk about the speck in our brother's eye. There are so many patterns that God has given us to navigate out of this, so we don't fall either victim or become ensnared in this shame response in the form of blame, dominance, recrimination, volatility, conflict, and an unnatural affection that is imitation of love, but is not real love. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig further into this subject of shame, narcissism, and the New Testament. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Mark Baker, head of the Levi Counseling Centers and author of Overcoming Shame, Let Go of Others' Expectation, and Embrace God's Acceptance. And today we're talking about shame and narcissism, this condition that causes so many to deflect, to be engaged at only a surface level, but only as long as you are useful to them, line up behind them, support them, and agreement with them. But the moment that you exhibit any kind of independent thinking, you are attacked, rejected, and squashed, and you become a victim of narcissistic behavior that has taken a toll on many relationships. Dr. Mark Baker, welcome back.
Good to be back. I think it's a really important subject for us to address, especially now in our culture today. What is narcissism? How do we understand that? And I think it's important, as we've been saying, to acknowledge that it shows up in many different forms. We think of narcissistic people as being the upfront people, the loud people, the attractive people, the ones who always want to be in leadership, but that's not always the case. I think it's important for us to acknowledge the special case of negative narcissism. Negative narcissism is the person who believes they're a victim in life, who believes that their circumstances are so awful that they have no power in life. And these people are looking for other people to take care of them. Not because they really want the help, but they want people to try to help them. And there's the attention. If I can get the attention of everybody in the room, if everybody in the room knows how pathetic my circumstances are and how much a victim I am of my circumstances, not my fault, it's my circumstances' fault that I'm so pathetic and I'm so powerless. The core of negative narcissism is the belief that you're powerless. They're looking for other people who will join them in that belief that they are powerless, and they will try to help them. So they're looking for someone to get in what I call the victim trap. My first book was on dealing with the victim mentality. The victim trap is when I believe I'm powerless, and they often will find themselves in religious communities because we go to a religious community to help other people, right? Well, if I find someone in my community who pathetically needs my help, that's where I'll start. And it becomes then an endless input of effort to try to help this person change, and they can't seem to change. And we just think, well, if we try harder, maybe we can get them to change. But that negative narcissism, at its core, as I've been saying, is shame. It's unhealed shame. It's a belief that I'm unworthy of love, I'm defective, there's something about me that disqualifies me from love, but it doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying to get other people to give me attention. If I don't feel loved, I will substitute attention. As you were saying earlier, why would I act out? Why does any kid act out knowing they're going to get a spanking afterwards? It's because they'll prefer attention to nothing. If I don't feel loved, I'll substitute attention for that. And even negative attention is better than no attention because then I feel unloved. And I can't deal with the pain of the shame of feeling unlovable, so then I substitute attention. And negative attention, in its extreme form, the negative narcissism, results in a victim mentality. And we often find those in religious communities where they will go there knowing that people are going to give me a lot of attention and keep pouring that attention, and never it doesn't heal me. I don't change because I don't really want a relationship with you. I just want the attention to quiet my shame. It's the same core narcissism that we see in traditional narcissism. It's just in the negative form of victim mentality. And sadly, it's encouraged a lot. I see people who come to me who are engaged in legal battles, and they go on and on and on. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in these legal battles, and it's not really because they want justice. It's because they need to engage in that process of confirming their victimhood, and that's it's unfortunate because it does nothing to heal the shame. If you just give people attention when their core issue is shame, it doesn't heal it. The shame has to be brought out into the light and addressed honestly in order for it to heal. There's no amount of what we call antidotal behavior or substitute that heals us. We need the real thing. Real, genuine love is love for me and how I truly feel about myself, not attention for my behavior, which is a defense against how I truly feel about myself. So healing is there, but it's difficult to heal some people when what they want is attention, not healing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. Narcissism shows up in lots of different ways.
Paul made the statement that if you can be single, if you can live that lifestyle and not be married, then that's a good thing, and you should endeavor to do that. But if you can't, then go be married and give into that. Is there a point, and maybe the question is, do you reach a point where you make the decision that in order to love your neighbor as yourself begins with loving yourself, that you find that you are better off, you find more comfort in not being in a social, personal relationship? Or is that a symptom of just woundedness and fear of another barrier, another wall?
Right.
I look at my own life, and I'm at that crossroads at almost 69 years old, and saying, I've got my daughter, I've got my granddaughter. There's love there, there's affection there. I have that relationship. I'm 7 years out of an old betrayal. What do the next 20 years? My mother's 94, so what do the next 20 years look like? I'm comfortable. I'm not lonely. I'm not lonesome. How do we know what drives us to For instance, I'm saying the social distancing has now pushed people into social anxiety. They're afraid to go back out.
Right.
And so they're seeking treatment because they're now afraid they've been locked up for 6 months. Now I have this anxiety about going back out and dealing with people. I've found a way to be comfortable at home. Now I've got to leave my comfort zone again. I was comfortable in the world before, but now I'm dealing with this. We're seeing a rise in 40% increase in divorce, 57% increase in people talking about separation because of this closeness. This is amplifying and magnifying these relational issues, and some are coming together and some are dividing over them, and much has to do with this shame and narcissistic behavior as one tries to now, because of increase in time in contact, they're now having more opportunities to insinuate their way into the narrative and push the blame off on other people when it doesn't work.
Right. It's a crisis we're all trying to face now. What is the nature of our relationships? Can too much closeness be too much? Right. I would say that the short answer is, when Paul was talking about the gift of celibacy, he was specifically talking about sex and marriage, and there's certain people who choose what the Catholic Church calls the third way, which is, I'm choosing not to be sexually involved with anybody. And that's a choice. That's a legitimate choice for certain people to say, marriage is not for me, so I'm going to invest my energies in other ways. That does not mean that Paul was saying you should not be relational. I don't believe that at all. I think he was saying there are certain people who don't have the gift of being married, or at that time in their life, let's put it that way. At this season of your life, you're not called to marriage. That's a very legitimate position for people to take. At the same time, we are fundamentally relational beings, and you will need a community. You will need people to love. You will need relationships. You will need intimacy. You need connection. You need touch. What we're finding now is people are suffering because they're not getting touched. There's no hugging. I'm going to have lunch with two friends of mine I've known for 30 years today, and I'm anxious. I've been hugging these guys for 30 years, and this is the first time I've seen them both together. We're going to wear masks and have lunch together out actually in the backyard of one of their houses. I'm used to touch and camaraderie and the love that comes from that kind of kinesthetic connection. So we are called for connection, but healthy connection is a balance of distance and closeness. So there can be too much closeness, which is actually unhealthy. We need to recognize the distinctiveness. So what Daniel Stern and others are saying, what Margaret Mahler called separation and individuation. She said we need to be individuals, separate and individual. The new infant research is saying, no, that's not right. But we do need to recognize distinctiveness in relationships. So we've changed the language. Individuation, don't like the term. Recognizing the distinctiveness of the others in the relationship is a sign of health. So you can be too close. We can be enmeshed. We can not be able to tolerate the differences between us in relationship. That's not healthy. I need to be able to be with you and know you're different than me. We don't agree on everything. You see that differently than I do. And my ability to tolerate the distinctiveness in relationship is a sign of health. So there's a separation that we need to recognize, that we're not the same. We don't have to all act, walk, talk, smell alike in order to get along. I can be with people who believe stuff different than me. That distinctiveness shouldn't keep me from relating. And now we're back to our fundamental nature again. I still love you. I still need to connect with you. I still respect you, even though I disagree with you. The healthiest form of relationship is when we can say to the other people, that's a really good point. I think how you got there, I really can see why you believe that. I don't happen to believe that. I don't see it that way, but I see why you do. You're not an idiot for believing the way you are. You're not wrong, bad, immoral. I don't need to castigate you go on marches against you because you disagree with me. I can recognize the distinctiveness and maintain a relationship. So, yes, we go through seasons where we need more distance, more closeness, but we never stop needing relationship. And we do need to tolerate the distinctiveness in relationship to be able to recognize our differences and still love and still relate. And I fear a serious polarization in our country right now because we can't tolerate our distinctiveness and remain in relationship. It used to be, and Joe Biden was proud of this. It used to be, I'm proud of myself for working across the aisle, they would call it. I'm going to try to work with someone who disagrees with me, and that was the American way. That's gone now. If you're across the aisle, you're bad. We cannot appreciate distinctiveness and remain in relationship. And I fear, because it's ontologically unhealthy to not be able to allow differences and yet still love and still remain in relationship.
It's a lot to take in as we look at the connection between shame and narcissism. I think that probably one of the most outstanding narcissists of the Bible was King Herod. He exhibited, if you didn't line up behind him, agree with him and follow him, and all these mad dashes for palace building and chasing after and being afraid of Jesus and wanting to have him killed because he would usurp his position, is a great example. Saul, a great example of a narcissist that would defy God in not doing exactly what he was told because he wanted to show off. He wanted to show off his prowess, and in the end, it cost him his life. Because it was so important, the prestige was so important that the consequence of his failure wasn't what drove him to death. It was the fall from the height. And so as we see people taking their lives, you can probably connect it with a reframing of what it is they perceive has changed through these circumstances where they've lost this following, this charisma, this power over other people. And then you find yourself alone, and then you have to rebuild. And that's not a bad thing. God does a lot of stripping away, a lot of pruning in order to make room for new growth. And so I experienced that in my life, is that when I came face to face with me, there had to be a lot of stripping away, a wardrobe change psychologically, adopting a whole new style of psychological attire in order to be able to walk a different way. And I want to encourage our audience that the way, the truth, and the life is through Messiah, and you can't go wrong modeling your responses after his. Even if when you give them, the only reason you're giving them is because he said to give them, you will find that that behavior will become intrinsic to your life if you start now. And blessing those who curse you, I did it through clenched teeth. And my prayer was, Lord, bless that sorry sucker if you can. That's how I prayed for my enemy. That was the first prayer I ever offered, and knew that God chuckled because I was trying to do my part, but everything within me was so resistant that that's all I could get out is, you bless that sorry sucker if you can. And for 30 days, that was my prayer until my heart began to soften. And that's just the reality of trying to navigate through these waters of both the natural psychology, the soulish part of our lives, reconciling with the spirit that lives within us, and trying to find a harmonizing of the two so they're no longer warring against each other, but they're partnering and strengthening us and shoring us up, but yet keeping us transformed into the image of Messiah. Dr. Mark Baker, Always insightful, always great to talk with you. And the thing I love about you the most is that it's not all clinical, it's biblical, it's sound principle, and it's really quite clear that God tells us how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We just have to read it and apply it.
Yes.
And if we do that, the outcome is not our responsibility. And that's a great freedom given to us, that if you do it His way, it's His responsibility.
Right.
It's not yours.
No, just do our part.
So great to see you, my friend. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. God bless you, and I will see you right back here next month for the next edition of Overcoming Shame with Dr. Mark Baker. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.